So this is the Mac Studio, and it's products like this that get me truly excited about my job. Like, I've always dreamed of having this much performance in a form factor this small. You know, if you were to do this with a PC right now, you'd have to like nerf the CPU or nerf the GPU so that it wouldn't overheat, and you still have issues like loud fans. But this is incredible, you know? It may not do everything you want, but it's really good at certain things. And I love the fact that they were able to use a similar design to the Mac Mini. Like, for some context, okay, the width and the depth is identical to the Mac Mini. It's 3 times higher, and it's about 3 times heavier at 8 pounds, but overall, it's still a very small and portable form factor. There's tons of ports. On the front, you have 2 USB Type-C ports and an SD card slot. Now, because mine is the M1 Ultra version, these are Thunderbolt 4, but if you buy the M1 Max, they'll just be USB Type-C that can run up to 10 gigabits per second. This SD card slot is UHS 2. And then on the back, you have 4 more Thunderbolt 4 ports, capable of up to 40 gigabits per second, 10 gigabit Ethernet. This is huge for me. I have a NAS here in the studio. I edit directly off of it, and it directly connects via 10 gigabit Ethernet. Power connector. Okay, a beautiful braided cable. It doesn't feel like your standard power cable that connects to the back. There's no chunky power brick. The PSU is inside. You have 2 more USB-A ports. These are 5 gigabits per second, HDMI, audio jack, power button, and then on the bottom, you have holes that have been laser cut into the chassis to allow air in. And then what happens is that air gets pushed up onto the CPU to cool the components, and then it gets pushed out of the back and away from you and the computer. Funnily enough, there's actually a speaker inside of here. You don't need to buy speakers if you want to use this thing. Now, is the speaker good? I mean, it's clear, it's clean. It just doesn't get loud, and I wouldn't want it to be my main set of speakers, right? You're still better off buying your own speakers or using the speakers on the Apple Studio display if you decide to get that combo. But performance is what I really want to talk about. If you decide to go for the M1 Max, it's going to be identical to the MacBook Pro 14 or 16. The thermal envelope is pretty close. But this is the M1 Ultra. And for those of you unfamiliar, the M1 Ultra is literally 2 M1 Maxes fused together with bandwidth fast enough that the system thinks it's a single chip. No scheduling or no manipulation has to happen from the operating system to move processes around. It just thinks it's one chip. And on top of that, you get double the cores. So 20 CPU cores instead of 10, 64 GPU cores instead of 32, and double the media engine. Now, if you're talking about synthetic benchmarks, then yeah, right? Like, the Intel PC is going to score higher in single-core clock speeds in CINEBENCH R23. The same holds true with multi-core speeds. The PC wins out. But as I told you in my previous MacBook Pro video, synthetic benchmarks never tell the true story. If you are using Final Cut, this is going to be a massive upgrade. If you're working with 8K footage, which I don't think a lot of people are, but maybe you are, you could literally have 18 streams of 8K footage playing at the same time, and it will do it smoothly. Now, granted, this isn't ProRes, so it's not as impressive as doing it with 422 10-bit footage from a Sony camera, but the fact that it can do it is still remarkable. If you're using Adobe Premiere Pro, the performance is very similar to a PC. Like, they were exchanging blows with my RTX 3080 Ti. And the reason why I'm comparing it to a PC, specifically an i9 12900K, is because a lot of the graphs Apple had on stage were benchmarking this against a 12900K. The GPU was an RTX 3090, but I don't have one. I only have an RTX 3080 Ti, which is pretty close overall. As for Photoshop, the i9 12900K came first, but in all fairness, I had to run it through Rosetta because the benchmark application hasn't been recompiled for Apple Silicon, but I have a feeling if it was, it would be pretty much identical. Like, for example, I used Blender's benchmark, which has been compiled for Apple Silicon now. And if you were just to use the CPU, the M1 Ultra is faster than the 12900K. But the thing is, people who do 3D work are using GPUs, and the RTX 3080 Ti was able to render significantly more scenes in a shorter amount of time than the 64-core GPU inside of here. But I wanted to do some of my own personal tests because I use DaVinci Resolve. I loaded up on both of the computers, and scrolling and scrubbing and all that kind of stuff was equally smooth on both devices. The only thing, or only area rather, where this really excelled was rendering. Like this was able to render in both H.264 and H.265 significantly faster than the i9-12900K paired with an RTX 3080 Ti. And the reason being is because of that media engine. If you take the media engine away, and you're doing something really graphically intensive, that's when the NVIDIA card starts to come up again. But if you're doing like video work, which requires that media engine, this thing is the king. But there's also other things to take into consideration. The entire time I was working this machine, I could barely hear the fans. Like I'd have to put my ear to the chassis in order to hear the fan, and it was so low. My PC, on the other hand, you know what? Have a listen for yourself. This is what my PC was doing when I was rendering these files. I mean, come on, that's crazy. This thing is using up to 200 watts less of power than my PC and doesn't break a sweat, whereas my PC was about to literally go through the wall. And that's something that people need to take into consideration. Sure, in some of these benchmarks, the PC is faster, but at the expense of heat, power, and noise. But if you're a developer, this scored the fastest Mozilla Firefox compile time I have ever seen on my channel. It did it in just 7 minutes, which is absolutely insane. Of course, me being me, because I love to game, I decided to throw some games on this. It's a nice improvement from the M1 Max, but it's not going to come anywhere close to the RTX 3080 or even 3080 Ti. Look, if you're a video creator, music producer, or a developer, this is it. Like, this does an amazing job while staying cool, quiet in such a small form factor. But if you are a 3D artist, you're still technically better off with a PC for sheer performance. Those NVIDIA cards, the RTX 3080, 3080 Ti, assuming you can get one, will significantly outperform this when you're rendering scenes. More so with 3D work and a lot less with After Effects, like you still get really great performance. But if you're trying to milk performance, the NVIDIA cards are gonna do it better for now. But honestly, I am like super impressed with this. For me as a video creator, this is like everything I've always wanted in such a small package. If you have any questions about it, let me know in the comment section down below. I will be reviewing the Apple Studio display, so make sure to drop your questions for that too. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.